Okay, I'll do the intro.
It looks like we're confirmed live on YouTube. Quick, roll the intro video so nobody notices.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
Our chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, planet.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight downside SCE off. Say again, SCE off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Hello, everybody. You are looking live at Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where SpaceX is fueling up a Falcon Heavy rocket for a pre-launch static fire test ahead of the USSF-44 mission slated to launch no earlier than next week. My name is Thomas Burkhart, News Director for NASASpaceflight, and we are spooling up live coverage of Falcon Heavy lighting 27 Merlin engines in this pre-launch test should set the stage for Falcon Heavy's fourth ever flight on a classified mission for the U.S. Space Force. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm seeing a bunch of 5x5s in chat, so we're all set there. Thanks for letting us know that you can hear us, and thank you, or hear me at least. I should introduce the rest of us that are on commentary today. Starting at the top, we got Adrian Bile on commentary. Adrian, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I mean, how can you do bad if you see a Falcon Heavy venting on the pad, right?
It's pretty great. It's something we haven't seen in a while. It's been about, I don't know, 3 years or so. And it's good to be back, I would say. We also got Chris Gebhardt, who's out there in the field at the press site today, offering us some camera views and, of course, a microphone, because we got to hear that rocket. Chris, how are you doing this evening?
We do indeed. I am doing absolutely just fine, and I think lighting 27 Merlin engines on the 27th day of the month is a nice coincidence, shall we say.
Oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that. That's fantastic.
Same.
Thank you, Chris, for rolling out. And who else we got around here? I believe we have Sawyer Rosenstein on comms with us tonight as well. Sawyer, how you doing?
I am doing great, Thomas. Like you said, it's been 3 years since we've seen Falcon Heavy light up her engines and ready to see it happen again tonight ahead of launch.
Awesome. So right now what you're seeing is a very venti and frosty Falcon Heavy rocket and transporter erector out at 39A. There's a couple weird things about this rocket. Normally when you come to see a rocket, you'll see something roughly aerodynamic near the top of the rocket. We'll get to that in a second. But the big thing to pay attention to is all those vapors going around the rocket. That is, of course, the sign that fueling has started. And there, right there, is that a 20-minute vent?
That would be the T-minus 20-minute vent, my friend.
You know,
boy.
we actually had a lot of questions in the previous stream, and we never actually got to it for the rollout, like Raptor. I guess it's not Raptor side, it's Space Coast. The VAB side chat that we did when Falcon Heavy rolled out was if the T-minus 20-minute event would still be a T-minus 20 minutes, because this is Falcon Heavy. And yes, because remember, that 20-minute event is the indicator that they're switching from RP1 kerosene loading to liquid oxygen loading on the upper stage. And of course, the upper stage on Falcon 9 versus Falcon Heavy is exactly the same. So, the T-minus 20-minute event is not any different on a Falcon Heavy fueling sequence, and that is basically remains the same. So that gives us a good on-time indicator that we are targeting what is likely the opening of a window at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Because again, it's 22 minutes according to the clock, but it's roughly 20 minutes. So should be around 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, or I guess that's midnight UTC for a T0 for this test. And but yeah, seeing lots of other vapors as, of course, the first stages on this rocket, or I guess, I don't know, are there multiple first stages, or is it one first stage and 2 side boosters? How does that work?
Oh, that depends a lot on rockets, how they frame it, right? Like we have also with some of the Russian rockets where the booster, I think, is the first one, and the center core is the second stage and everything. Like
Yeah.
there's weird ways to describe this. I think they refer it as the boosters, and the still the main engine, right?
Right, yeah,
So
because they call, like, when the center core shuts down, they call that MECO, so main engine cutoff. So I think that usually goes along with, well, all right, I'd say the first stage, but then I just remembered that ULA calls Centaur's engine the main engine, so maybe that's not exactly accurate. Either way,
Yeah,
but
theoretically, it's all this fueling at the same time. When you talk about quote
yes,
unquote first stage fueling, it's all three of those.
right, yeah. So
yes.
all three Falcon cores getting filled with both RP-1 kerosene and liquid oxygen, and all of those vapors come from those super cold propellants cooling the Florida air that is around the rocket and condensing the water vapor around the rocket. But either way, that T-minus 20-minute event giving us a good indicator that the upper stage is also going well. And you'll notice at the very top of the rocket, someone forget the payload or something? What's missing? Why is there no payload fairing on top?
Well, there's no payload fairing on top because the payload customer for this particular mission, the United States Space Force, doesn't want the payload on top of it for the static fire. They want to keep the payload a little bit more protected. Even though static fire operations are safe, anytime you light an engine, of course, there's always that risk of the thing that you don't want to happen happening, because at the end of the day, it is a machine overall, right? And you have to protect for the possibility that something could go wrong. So some payload customers for this Falcons that still static fire say, yeah, go ahead and put it on. It's okay. We don't really, we accept that risk. And others still say, no, we would prefer not to accept that risk and for you to static fire first. So after we're done, or after rather SpaceX is done with static fire, hopefully here in about 20 minutes, then tomorrow Falcon Heavy would go back into the hangar to get the payload put on it for then the liftoff now scheduled for November 1st.
Yes.
Dare I say it would
Yeah.
be a most unfortunate thing if it happened?
Oh,
Okay.
dear.
All
Sorry.
right. We're going there now. Oh man. But yeah, so you mentioned that November 1st date, so maybe not everyone who's been on Twitter the last hour or so, or also it was mentioned in the Space Coast live chat if people were stalking Falcon Heavy before fueling started. The new launch date is no earlier than November 1st, and we would expect SpaceX to confirm whether that is still the date after the static fire test is complete. But not so at least a 1 day slip from that original October 31st target. And again, that's just probably to do with Falcon Heavy has not launched in about 3 years, and so the SpaceX teams and all the ground equipment and all those things getting put through their paces in a different way than they have for several years, and just working out some knocking off the rust, if you will, on some of those
Yeah.
systems, perhaps.
Which definitely seems to be a trend, right? It's very interesting to me that Falcon Heavy encountered some issues before they could get to its fueling campaign. And it had been 3 years, right? Even though the pad had been used. And it had also been about
Right.
3 years for SLS since they had hauled the mobile launcher out there to do the fueling system
Oh.
tests. And now they're running into issues on that side too. And then different systems, you can see how they can respond to it. But very, very fascinating to me that the two big rockets both had some issues here after 3 years of not being seen. Of course, SLS
Yeah.
hadn't been seen before, but you get the point I'm trying to make.
Right,
Yes.
yeah. And it's more or less expected too with these new with rockets that don't fly as often. I think we've talked about ULA kind of learning that
Yep.
lesson too with like Delta IV Heavy and even Atlas that doesn't fly, every week like Falcon 9 does. If you have the time to cycle your systems, check on your systems more frequently, you'll have less scrubs, you'll have less holds and delays and things like that. SpaceX certainly showing that with the Falcon fleet, which pretty rarely gets delayed, but Falcon Heavy not flown in 3 years, so it'll have just a little bit of delays, but they'll make sure they get it right.
Yeah, and I believe that new T0 that they're approximately targeting, which we'll get the official time, is about 9:40 a.m. Eastern time on the
Mhm.
1st.
And I think we should also look a little bit, to the sequencing here, because we said, oh, there's the big T-minus 20-minute vent, right? But it was actually at 22 minutes,
Yeah.
not 20. And that's because Falcon Heavy has a slightly different fueling sequence that it uses, right? We're very used to seeing the Falcon 9s begin fueling and begin their auto sequence at the T-minus 35-minute mark.
Mhm.
But the Falcon Heavies actually begin fueling of the first stage RP1 fueling actually kicks off 50 minutes ahead of liftoff.
Yes.
And then first stage LOX begins 45 minutes. And it isn't until you get to the 35-minute mark that you sort of start to get the more understood process of like, okay, now stage 2 starts fueling RP1 first and then stops and then switches over to LOX. But because it's Falcon Heavy, some of those things are about 2 minutes ahead of when we normally expect to see them with the Falcon 9s.
And I
Right.
I just to basically add to this, I think that's also something that sometimes gets forgotten about Falcon Heavy because it's easily that people just confuse it like 3 Falcon 9 strapped together. But especially the center core is very different in that we know that it's not a basic Falcon 9 in the middle there, and it's just a different kind of rocket. Yes, it uses the same kind of Falcon architecture, but fueling this is still vastly it's still a different rocket from Falcon 9.
All
It has
right.
some changes.
Good
And
point.
and all of that to this point, in the timeline that we've been seeing indicates they are going for the firing at 8 p.m. if everything stays on track.
Right, yeah. And in fact, right on
And there we
cue,
go.
thank you,
Yeah.
Michael Baylor, who's in the back end. At least I think Michael's the one that did that. We got like all 3 producers involved with this at this point. But yeah, we got that T-minus clock, which is counting down till 8 p.m. Eastern time, which should, again, be the T0 for this test based on all of the events and things that we've seen. It's like having an Adrian spreadsheet, but way more precise. No offense, Adrian, but, you know,
No,
SpaceX kind of gives us the answers, so it's a little different.
if I could beat a launch schedule, that would be an achievement. No way.
All
And just
right,
to point out, while we're
so
talking about the venting is, for those who haven't seen, completely normal as the super cooled gases hit the warm Florida air as they purge and clean some of the lines out as they continue with fueling. As well
right.
as some of the cooled fuels on the outside of the rocket, too. Same thing. That warm Florida air will get you.
There we go. All right, we do have some questions that have come in, and we do try to answer some questions. So since we got about 14 minutes before T0, let's try to speed run through a couple of these. And the first one from John is asking, what's the expected duration of the static fire test? They would guess about 5 seconds. Anyone have varying guesses? It should just be a few seconds, right?
Yeah, the heavies in the past have done anywhere between 5 and 7 seconds. But I think once we got into the more reliable Block 5 variants, it's been closer to 5. But the amount of time that they static fire, even a Falcon 9, can depend on mission parameters and customer
Sure.
requests and booster ages and yada 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 yada. You know, and I don't mean that to be flippant. I mean it can really depend on a lot of different factors. So yeah, about 5 seconds, but don't be shocked if it's 4. Don't be surprised if it's
Yeah.
6. It's kind of one of those things. Yeah.
Right. And the only real indicator of whether the static fire was successful, assuming we don't see anything dramatic, would just be a SpaceX tweet that'll come after they do a quick look data review, make sure everything looks good on that first review, and they'll say static fire test complete, targeting whatever for the launch or pending range, something, whatever they're going to say regarding the launch target. But that'll give us an indicator as to how the test went. About that ignition sequence, I believe in the past they light the side boosters just like a couple seconds before the center core, right?
So the ignition sequence has altered just a little bit as they've gone through different iterations. You're exactly right. On the very first one, Thomas, they lit the side cores about T-minus 7 seconds. So you had a really huge buildup until the center core, the first stage, lit at the very end there. And then the ignition sequences have actually moved a little bit closer to T0 with some of the others, but it is still a bit of a different startup process because you have to account for the extra acoustics, the extra vibration, and everything that's going through the transporter erector, that's going through the vehicle as you perform that startup sequence. So it's not only a matter of staggering the start of the individual engines from one another, but it's also a matter of staggering how they start on the boosters based on how the thrust and the loads are changing through the system as those engines come up.
Yeah, gotcha. So my apologies. I assumed that was still the same, but that's only a demo flight thing. So thank you for correcting me. All right, another question here. KK asking, could this launch have been on a Falcon 9? Why are they using a Falcon Heavy? Is it because it's going directly to GEO?
Yeah, a lot of that
Sorry?
has to
Yeah,
do
go for it.
with the payload on board, and we know for sure there was at least one payload confirmed, the Tetra 1 satellite. Beyond that, we don't know if there's one or more additional satellites. We know it's at least one more for the U.S. Space Force. It is a classified payload, but as you mentioned, this one is going to be a first for Falcon Heavy, in that rather than dropping off the satellite in a geostationary transfer orbit, this one will take it all the way to geostationary orbit, almost 23,000 miles up. So once it lifts off and we finally have second engine cutoff, SECO, it then has a nearly 6-hour coast as it goes all the way up to essentially its apogee there before firing again to drop off its payload in GEO. So that is a large part of it.
And then what I absolutely love, Sawyer, is that if some of you have probably noticed, the second stage looks a little odd, not just because it doesn't
Oh,
have the
yeah.
payload fairing, but because it has a gray stripe at the bottom, that the bottom part of it is gray. And this is actually a direct function of the prolonged coast up to geostationary orbital altitude and then the relight, because that gray stripe with the white actually allows for thermal conditioning of both of the propellant tanks, both the propellant and the oxidizer tank on the second stage, allowing them to maintain their cryogenic temperatures much better than they would be with just a pure white stage, and maintain the temperature differentials between the two and the common bulkheads as well. So it's a little piece of thermal control that sort of belies the extended duration of the mission for the second stage here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Chris. Next question here. Amiga asking, why is there a 20-minute event or a 22-minute event in Falcon Heavy's case for a static fire? They're not going to fire the Merlin vacuum engine. That would be problematic.
No, they are not. But static fires for the Falcon Heavies and Falcon 9s are designed to be absolute full up practices of the countdown to the extent that you can. Obviously, you can't practice the parts with the payload if the payload isn't there. But the only main difference is that when they light the engines, the clamps on the launch pad are just told by the software, this is a static fire, don't let go of the rocket, just keep holding it down. But other than that, it is essentially a launch. They need range support just as if it is going to be a liftoff, and stuff like that, because you have to prepare for those eventualities. So they still do the vent because they're actually testing the entire countdown process, save for the hold downs actually releasing the vehicle.
And obviously, as
Including go ahead, Sawyer.
I was going to say, and obviously, as we've seen with other rockets, this is the time to test every single feature, every valve, every vent, every fuel line, because if there is a problem, now is a good time to fix it rather than on launch day with that payload on board.
Yep, there you go. All right, we've got about 8 minutes to go, so we should be getting up. I believe at 7 minutes is still the MVAC. No, not MVAC. It's not MVAC. Merlin 1D engine chill on the 3 first stages. We won't see anything visual on that, but that's just another milestone in the countdown as they prepare the engines to ignite. Also got a couple of super chats in here really quick. Maurice became a PADRET member, so we appreciate that. Moldy Space Industry says, can't believe the last time this rocket flew, we didn't even have the Thomas fan club. Thanks, Moldy Space. Appreciate it. And then Carrie Ann became a PADRET member as well, so appreciate that support. Everyday Astro Kid says, bacon. Always appreciated. All right, question about Shady91, who says, where is the center core going to land? Unfortunately, I guess it's going to land in the ocean, just it's not going to survive the landing. It'll be a... Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
For some definition of landing, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the center one, which all 3 of these, by the way, are brand new boosters flying their first flight. Unfortunately, that means for the center core, it will be its only flight, but you have, I believe it's 1064 and 1065 as the side boosters, which are scheduled to land back on land at landing zones 1 and 2 in an RTLS, and then 1066 will be, we'll just say, expended. Whether it lands gently or not is to be determined, but it will not fly again.
Right, yeah. According to the hazard zones that are published for this launch, the first stage is expected to any of the first stage that survives reentry, because again, it's not going to be controlled or anything, will be somewhere around 1,450 kilometers downrange, which is very, very far downrange, much farther than any successful drone ship landing for sure.
You could make the joke that you could say this is just a normal Falcon Heavy launch with 2 landing side boosters and just an expandable center core.
Except this time they're doing it on purpose, Adrian.
Yes.
There's a difference there.
Yes. Okay.
But yeah, 2 side boosters coming back to land at LZ1 and 2 to be reused on future Space Force Falcon Heavy flights, so that'll be exciting. All right, 6.5 minutes to go. Got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Bass is asking, why don't they use Falcon Heavy for Starlink missions? Adrian?
Oh yeah, that's so with Starlink there would actually Falcon Heavy would be absolutely overkill for Starlink in terms of that the fairing would just not have any more space for Starlings. We have seen in the past how these Starlings are stacked inside the fairing, and the capabilities of Falcon Heavy would just not be needed for that. You would just fill the fairing very fast and would not probably get that much more of satellites in there. So that's why they use Falcon 9 for that.
There you go. Thank you, Adrian. Let's see. Here's a good question. Why do they launch Falcon Heavy from 39A? Is that an unnecessary risk to crewed operations? Chris, you want to take that quick?
Well, there's an added risk, right? But the pad is not only used for crew operations, right? The pad has been used for Starlink, for regular missions, for cargo resupply to the International Space Station as well. But Pad 40 can also handle the cargo flights. Is Falcon Heavy an added risk to Pad 39A? I mean, yes, it is an added risk, but in large part, it's no more of an added risk than a Starlink mission launching off of 39A.
Right.
Yeah, and right now 39A is also the only pad that's currently modified to support the extra infrastructure that's needed for Falcon Heavy too.
Right, yeah. It's one of the biggest launch pads in the United
Right.
States as far as, the size of a rocket it can support. So limited options for Falcon Heavy anyway.
You're telling me 23 meganewtons are hard to handle?
Yeah, just a little bit, All right, we got 4 minutes left. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. When we get to 1 minute, I'm going to make sure I shut up. But a quick question from Thomas Hayden, who says, do we know how many second stage ignitions there will be on this flight? I believe there should be 3. So first one will get the upper stage and payload into an initial low Earth orbit parking orbit. Then there'll be a second burn. That's basically the geostationary transfer burn. And on a GTO mission, that would be the last one. But so that'll kick the highest point of the orbit out to geostationary altitude. But then there will be a third burn after a very long coast phase to circularize the orbit at geostationary altitude, and that's the direct to geo part of this mission. So there should be 3 MVAC ignitions. After that, there will also likely be what's called a passivization, which is basically where Falcon Heavy's upper stage vents any remaining propellants, any residuals after that last burn, so that while the stage sits in a graveyard orbit, slightly out of geostationary orbit, it will, if it encounters micrometeorite debris or something like that, or for any other reason breaks apart, it won't have the extra explosive nature of having propellants. It'll just be metal kind of breaking apart, which is a lot less dangerous, even though still not ideal.
And it can use some of the venting to also move itself away too.
Yes, exactly. It's like thrust without ignition. It's pressurized gas, basically. But should be pointing out that the strong back has now retracted. Also, the strong back or the TE, the strong back is technically part of the TE, but the transporter that rolled Falcon Heavy out and raised it vertical has now retracted to the pre-ignition position. Say that 3 times fast. But of course, at launch, it'll throw back, just like on Falcon 9 missions, to help protect all the umbilicals. Today, we're not expecting that. We're just expecting it to remain in that position, just slightly tilted away for ignition, and then it'll reattach itself to the rocket after the static fire is complete. So 2.5 minutes to go. I think we can get one final question here. Franco is asking why the Central rocket is not going to be recovered on this flight. Adrian?
Because they need the performance. With the center core will in this mission perform a lot. It will be needed to get this payload with the specific requirements into that specific orbit they want to get. So they need the performance, and they don't have the margins to perform a landing. It's going very far down range, so at this point they would probably need the boost back to even get to the point where they could recover. And yeah, it's just the performance is just not there to recover the center core.
And to get added performance, there were no legs or grid fins added to it either.
Right, yeah, so you gain a little bit, or I guess you lose a little bit of mass that would make it more difficult to recover that core as well.
And there is our big T-minus 2 minute vent, which is the final propellant is done, loading is done, they are closing everything out and getting ready for ignition about 90 seconds from now.
We have a fully fueled Falcon Heavy on the pad.
I can't wait to feel what this. I can't wait to see what this feels like again.
It's been a while, Chris. It has been a while.
I'm kind of jealous, Chris, here. Like, usually I can handle this, but having a fully fueled Falcon Heavy there, I'm kind of jealous.
Indeed.
Thomas and I will join you soon.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, I
All right,
wonder. I don't know if this one's gonna shake my house because it's only burning for a couple seconds and it's standing on the ground. But anyway,
all right, I'll be back with us after it's done.
sounds good, Chris. Thanks so much for rolling out there. Less than 60 seconds to go. Falcon Heavy fully fueled. All seems to be on track again. This should be a few seconds, but we don't know the exact duration because again, that varies based on what the customer requests and things like that, and we don't really know exactly what they requested this test to do. So it'll be somewhere in the realm of like 3 to 7 seconds or something. But anywhere around that would be seen as expected. But yeah, again, live view of Falcon Heavy on the pad at 39A, and we are expecting a pre-launch static fire test, not a launch, just a static fire ignition in just over 20 seconds. Of course, there will also be that normal audio delay like on launch, so you'll see ignition, and then you'll hear then you'll actually hear ignition. But here we go, T-minus 10 seconds. And there's ignition. Stand by for the sound, y'all. Looks like about 8 seconds of burn or so.
Yeah, I counted 7.
Got the camera shake going there.
Oof.
You heard it, but you even saw the sound. That was kind of cool. All right, so there you go. That is about 8 seconds. That's me guesstimating, but bit of a static fire test there for Falcon Heavy and USSF-44. Looked to be about the normal duration that we would expect, and that looked to be like a successful pre-launch test that should set up a launch as early as next week. And as we all know, if you want to be sporting the NSF merch during that launch, we've got new Falcon Heavy merch to show. Things are in fact getting heavy with that static fire test, and you can check out the sweatshirts, the t-shirts, also some new metal prints we've just added for Falcon Heavy's return to flight. It's not really a return to flight, but first flight in over 3 years. Falcon Heavy merch now on shop.nasaspaceflight.com. I believe we're putting that link into chat. It's also in the description. And I know a lot of us are very excited for Falcon Heavy to be flying once again. And if you want to be sporting the new Heavy merch, check it out. Shop.nasaspaceflight.com. NASA Spaceflight will, of course, also be live for live launch coverage of the USSF-44 mission. And you can stay tuned for that here on the NASA Spaceflight channel as well. Again, that launch is currently slated for no earlier than Tuesday, November 1st. It's a 9:40 a.m. Eastern Time launch if it sticks to that date. But we'll expect SpaceX to confirm or deny basically that launch target once they do a quick data review of tonight's test. But let's see. I'll wait. I'll give Chris a second to come back because I know he was
Here,
at the
yep.
camera. Oh, he's here. Chris, did that look good to you?
Oh, it looked really fun to me. It was actually neat to see, how the orange flames actually played off the launch pad infrastructure too, especially as the side cores lit and the center core ramped up to full thrust. It was pretty impressive as a visual, especially the hold down element to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to see a rocket fire for that long and just stick in place. There's a new type of power from the ground system to like hold back all that force. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. It really is. It really is, and it's a fun physics moment too, because that you're expecting like that big ricocheting sound as a rocket takes off, but all of that sound is being directed at out the north end of the flame trench. The big overpowering sound you hear as a rocket lifts off is when it lifts off. That's what you hear. So it's fun watching static fires because the audio doesn't do what you're expecting it to do in some ways.
In a weird way, it's designed for that, right? It's designed
Yes.
to keep it there, to not let the sound, blow all out. So I would imagine it's weird.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons too where you see like you see the water like kind of trickle on at first during liftoffs, right? But then the water really turns on right at T0 to inundate the pad, and you don't really need to necessarily do that full sound suppression inundation if you're not lifting off.
Right. All right, so what are the next steps before we wrap up here? Obviously, they're going to have to move that TE back into the pre-ignition position. In fact, it might already be. It's kind of hard to tell. Looks like the TE already might have moved up and basically re-grabbed onto the upper stage there. near the top of the rocket. But they'll go ahead and detank the vehicle, and then we will expect to see the rocket go horizontal again and roll back to the hangar at 39A, because of course it's got to get that payload fairing installed with the classified Space Force payload on board. So they'll go ahead and do that integration back in the hangar, and then they'll roll back out, raise it vertical once more, and we should be in a launch stance by that point. And again, standing by for SpaceX to confirm the launch target, which should be no earlier than November 1st. That's this coming Tuesday. But then really quick, I'm going to speed run some super chats here. King's asking about which 24/7 streams show up on mobile. On mobile, YouTube basically just picks one, so that's not even something we control. But on desktop, you can always go and you should see all of them, whether it's Space Coast Live, McGregor Live, or Starbase Live. But you can always just go ahead and search those to find them instead of going straight to the channel. But yeah, on mobile, it's weird. Sorry, we can't really do much about that. Mackie with some super chat support, much appreciated. Josh Wright asking for more portrait metal prints. I will pass that on to the store team, and by the store team I mean Adrian, who's in charge of managing the store. So Adrian, more portrait metal prints, please. There we go. Really quick essay saying any date on SLS rollout. I believe last we heard that's November 4th, although I think NASA will confirm that a little closer too. But that should be Artemis 1 rollout for that next launch attempt.
Yeah, so by the end of the week, we should have a heavy vehicle away and another one on the other pad here at Kennedy.
Part of me was selfishly hoping that Falcon Heavy might get delayed a couple more days for the dual pad visual, but I'm not going to complain. I won't complain that a mission wasn't delayed, so you know.
And just as a side note here, because we are kind of in the area of the heavy right now, with Long March 5 also launching on October 31st, and Falcon Heavy on November 1st, and then SLS maybe in November. That's a huge amount of very heavy rockets launching in a very short amount of time.
Yep. Couple other super chats really quick. Maki just with some more super chat support, so we really do appreciate that. Corey became a Red Team member, so appreciated that as well. Let's see. Jay saying would love some NSF gear, but need some heavier shirt sizes. Adrian, we'll take a look at the shirt sizes, see what we can do on that front as well. But we do appreciate the support. Hope you can check out some metal prints and stuff like that at least. And then let's see. Oh, and then Don with some super chat support for the extra day's lunch for the Florida crew. Much appreciated. I hope you get to enjoy the launch while you're in town as well. But I think that's going to do it for our static fire coverage. Again, stay tuned to Space Coast Live, which is where I think we're going to throw y'all, because we'll keep an eye on the live views of 39A as SpaceX detanks and then starts to move Falcon Heavy back into the hangar for payload integration. And of course, we will be live for launch coverage on launch day here on the NASA Spaceflight channel. So everyone stay tuned to that. We will not be live for the Starlink mission that's coming up in like an hour. No media access from Vandenberg Space Force Base tonight, but SpaceX, of course, will be covering that on their channel. And we'll be covering it over on NASASpaceflight.com with our launch article that's already up there. But we'll keep in touch for future launch coverage from here on the Space Coast and elsewhere. Going around the horn really quickly, Adrian, thanks for hopping on the night.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I will now jump into bed.
yeah, it's a late night for you, Adrian, so please get some sleep. Chris, getting late for us here as well, so thanks for rolling out and hope you have a safe drive home tonight.
Indeed. Thanks for hosting too, Thomas.
Oh, my pleasure, absolutely. We also got Sawyer on comms, and Sawyer, I think you're going to be headed our way to support Falcon Heavy coverage soon as well, so looking forward to seeing you.
I absolutely am. I was just about to say, Thomas, Chris, we are going to have some fun down at the Cape for some heavy action, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there. And hopefully some viewers too.
The Florida crew is ready to support. I think even there's a mention of a wild Michael Baylor showing up to the Space Coast once again. I think he's flying in. But a shout out to the entire production team for helping with the stream as always. And that's going to do it for our live static fire coverage. Stay tuned for future coverage here on NASA Spaceflight. And head on over to Space Coast Live to keep a live look at Falcon Heavy on your screen. That'll do it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody.